welcome to another album review. Today we'll be going over Wofat's Midnight Cometh. Midnight Cometh probably came out maybe about 2 or 3 days ago, and it took me quite a while to digest it. We had taken a long drive down to Miami, me and my wife, and we decided to listen to it on the way down. I had purchased it on Google Music, played it through my phone. I'm still waiting for the actual vinyl to come in, and I'm pretty sure it's going to sound even more rich and fulfilling on vinyl than it did in the digital media. But as far as digital media, the way everything was engineered and produced came out very, very well for a doom sludge kind of album. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the guitar player, songwriter, singer was a former engineer, so he knows a lot about the ins and outs of the sonic quality in which, you know, this sort of music should be made and played and brought forth through, you know, whatever kind of speaker kind of comes out. And in so doing, I mean, that was one of the finer points. The thing that kind of hit me immediately in this album was the fact the music quality was so high. You know, it just instantly kind of harkens back to Black Sabbath's Paranoid. You know, if you've ever heard that on vinyl, it's very crisp, clear, but it still has a distinct sludge. I think a lot of times with doom metal releases nowadays, they kind of go a little bit overboard in the lo-fi quality range. They don't really mature enough to kind of bring forth this crisp kind of sludge. You know, it's hard to describe, but if you listen to this album, it's definitely of the highest quality. You know, everything, even though it is sludgier, has a precise note. You know, you can hear the notes ring out, and everything kind of fills in these weird sonic spaces that, you know, in other times seem a lot more murkier and too distorted to actually like pick out. The thing I find, you know, especially on this album, where the drums were also really, really well produced and mic'd. It sounded like you could almost hear every hit and every roll and every kind of musical expression the drummer's trying to get across. As far as music, you know, maybe what you might want to hear on this album or take notice to is, at least to my ear, I found it to be a little bit more bluesy, and I kind of picked up Wofat where The Conjuring had just come out, and that album was very, very heavy, and I didn't really pick up so much on these weird bluesy kind of parts. You know, it was more of a heavy affair, at least to my ear, and this album seems to be a lot more bluesy. Reading up on the influences of, you know, the band, I read an interview with the guitar player where he said that he was really into stuff kind of like Junior Kimbrough and the Allman Brothers, and you could definitely sort of hear this kind of blueprint of those bands come through, and where the riffs and the kind of southern blues kind of feel are like an underlying thing, but he kind of takes them and gives them steroids and beefs them up to become this pummeling riff giant that's really interesting, and it kind of harkens back maybe to more of the 70s kind of rock acts. You know, he also had mentioned Camel and Leaf Hound were one of the things. And those guys were very, very bluesy, but I don't think they ever quite made it to this kind of pummeling metal monstrosity that Wofat has kind of made itself into in the last couple of albums. If you look from their first couple albums to now, there's a lot of differences and there's a lot of similarities. The only similarity that I find is the common thread of being almost on the verge of desert rock, and, you know, obviously having the doom influence and the Sabbath influence, but it seems as though every album they kind of progress a little bit more into a progressive shade of heavy rock. You know, it almost seems as though he takes all these influences and molds them and produces these longer songs and more intricate riffs, and I definitely think, judging from the first couple albums, that his vocals have definitely matured a lot. It definitely seems as though he makes more interesting melodic lines and verses, and the choruses seem to be a lot more interesting than on the earlier releases. Not to say that they weren't interesting, but it just seems as though they kind of take on a more epic tone, and maybe more to my ear now, they seem a lot more interesting to me because I am kind of more into the bluesier area of things and more the 70s rock kind of thing, as opposed to nowadays in the doom metal genre. It seems like it's more or less about, you know, how much distortion and how heavy you could go and how long the song could be. You know, as for Wofat, especially Midnight Cometh, is not that kind of affair. It's not an affair to show you, you know, how heavy they can be. It's more of an affair to show you, you know, just how great a songwriters they've actually become. And also, you know, to mention back earlier, you know, I'm really into the blues influence on these certain bands. And Wofat really, with this album, kind of brought that to the forefront. But they also influenced, you know, or took influences from a lot of different things, even in a country sort of way. It seems as though there's just little tidbits of musical information that kind of pop out at you that you might not have heard before. There's even certain riffs that might sound like a more sludgier Motorhead kind of progressions going on, which is really interesting. And I think each individual band member really had a chance to kind of shine on this album and show, you know, their different and unique talents, or things that maybe on other albums weren't quite so prevalent. The drummer really, you know, as I mentioned earlier, everything's very clean and crisp. And he never really goes into these full-on, like, John Bonham solos, but everything is played to complement the actual song, which is a real test of maturity that I could actually find and see and hear to my ears. The other thing that I found that was interesting was on a couple of songs you could actually hear the bass lines being played as a guitar player kind of steps back and lets that melodic feel and groove kind of, you know, make its way to the forefront. So all in all, you know, the Midnight Cometh is not really so much of a choppy affair so much as it's one big groove from start to finish that takes on many different variations on a theme, but in the end still has this kind of like cohesive whole that brings it all together and makes it very interesting to listen to. And it's not to dissuade you at all if you are a real big into the monstrous riffs and the heavy music. This album definitely has a ton of that, but it has variations so that you won't particularly get really bored with the overall album after only listening to it for 5 minutes. And to be completely honest, I think the first song actually goes over 5 minutes, and it holds its attention, and it kind of, like, you know, gets your blood boiling and brings you into the sense like you're hanging on to the song as well as you can, and it really grips you to a really nice degree where you're interested, and it keeps you going and going and going. And it's definitely, I would think too, if you're really into driving or taking long trips on a highway, this is really a great album to kind of enhance your drive. And also it's definitely an album where the guitar solos are very well played. I find that another thing too within doom music, or, you know, the new 70s retro rock feel, that the guitar playing is never really quite up to par with what it would have been back then. But the guitar on this album is really up to par, and it's really well played. You know, it's not so much a shred. It's more like, you know, the old style where Jimmy Page or Greg Allman or Jimi Hendrix or Jeff Beck, it's kind of in that vein. And when it does become more flashy, it definitely suits the song. And it definitely, he builds riffs. It's not as though he comes out like, you know, blaring where it's just guitar wankery. You know, he takes his lines and slowly builds them melodically, and then the flash really comes out. And it's really something ingenious and something that a lot of guitar players really should kind of take a look into doing more often, where, you know, you're actually watching something being built, and it gains more attention to my ear, you know, to watch something be, you know, slowly brought to the forefront. And overall as an album, I mean, I really think that Wofat's Midnight Cometh is just an amazing testament to how many bands that are out there that probably don't get as much street cred, only for the simple fact that people tend to lean more towards albums that are so heavy and so, more groundbreaking in the fact that, how in their face they are, that people sort of like take back on the fact that, there are really, really great songwriters within this genre. And I think Wolfat is really, really great at that, and are magnificent songwriters and magnificent, musicians as a whole. But not only that, the whole entire package has always been something that has been magnificent, all the way from their first album to now. They've really taken the time to give us something that we can all hold on to and slowly progress with the band. So please check out Wolfat's Midnight Cometh, and we hope to hear from you all soon. Please leave a comment in the comment box below, and please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to our videos, and we hope to hear from you soon. Bye!